Got it. Here's your rewritten script in full paragraph format. No bullet points, no section breaks, just flowing prose. Punchier, more engaging, and ready to read or voiceover. Have you ever watched a movie so good that you completely forgot you were watching a movie? Not literally, of course. You're still sitting in a dark theater surrounded by strangers crunching popcorn like farm animals. But mentally, emotionally, you disappear. You stop seeing the camera. You stop counting cuts. You stop thinking, that's the guy from that other thing. For 2 hours, you simply believe. That's the magic trick of great cinema. Sci-fi, fantasy, war epics, gangster dramas. It doesn't matter the genre. The goal is always the same. Build a world so convincing that the audience forgets it's fake. Think about The Godfather. You're not watching actors play mobsters. You're in the room with the Corleone family, practically smelling the marinara and the betrayal. Think about The Lord of the Rings. Nobody spends 3 hours going, that's Viggo Mortensen, he's not really Aragorn. Or, that's Ian McKellen. Wait, no, that's Gandalf. No, you're in Middle-earth, period. And Gladiator. Russell Crowe isn't an Australian actor doing Roman cosplay, he's Maximus. Ridley Scott doesn't just recreate ancient Rome, he makes you feel like you've marched through it. That is cinema. Not the lenses, not the VFX, not the 8K HDR technology. Belief. The audience has to believe. That's exactly why I walked out of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Feeling so conflicted. I admired it. I respected it. Parts of it were visually stunning, but I never believed it. I never felt like I was on a 10-year Greek journey across mythic seas. No, I felt like I was watching Matt Damon doing an Odyssey cosplay. Now, Hollywood has spent decades trying to bring Homer's epic to the big screen, and sometimes they nail it, other times they give us something that makes you wonder if the ancient poet is spinning in his grave. But if you're into mythology and history, and I mean really into it, then you should check out Heroes of History. Because this game hooked me bad. You build a team from over 120 historical and mythological legends. Napoleon, Tesla, and Odysseus himself, all fighting side by side, each with unique powers. And the real fun is figuring out which combinations actually work. Outside of battles, you manage your own civilization, watch it grow, and auto battles keep resources flowing, so you can jump in for 10 minutes or accidentally lose an hour, which happened to me. Right now, the Great Odyssey event is live, so you can recruit limited-time heroes like Odysseus, Penelope, and Menelaus to take on the new Scylla boss fight. And if you log in for 7 days straight, you'll unlock a free 5-star Odysseus that won't be available once the event ends. If you want a head start, use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, then enter the code ROBOTH to grab a free starter boost with 10 antimatter, 2000 XP, and 20,000 food. Just go to the menu, profile, settings, redeem promo code, and enter ROBOTH. Thanks to Heroes of History for sponsoring this video. But back to Nolan. Visually, The Odyssey is spectacular, no shock there. The man knows how to point an IMAX camera at a landscape and make you weep. The sea, the ships, the sheer scale, nobody shoots large format cinema quite like Christopher Nolan. Nobody. This is blockbuster filmmaking on a scale Hollywood barely attempts anymore, and I genuinely want more of that. I'll take a giant, original mythological swing over another lazy franchise sequel any day of the week. So if you're expecting me to spend the next 10 minutes screaming that this movie is terrible, I'm sorry to disappoint, because it isn't. It's a good movie, sometimes a very good movie, but it's also one of the most emotionally distant films Christopher Nolan has ever made, and I think the reason is surprisingly simple: a lack of immersion. And immersion is the magic that can take a good film and make it great. That immersion problem starts very early on. In the opening scenes, we get Spider-Man, rapper Travis Scott, and Elliot Page. It's like a weird in-your-face checklist to guarantee Oscar eligibility, crammed in right at the start, just in case Academy members only watch the first 10 minutes. Now, Tom Holland can't help that he's Spider-Man, but it really doesn't help that they lead into this film with a new Spider-Man trailer, and then his whole performance in this movie feels like Peter Parker in a toga. I've heard Nolan doesn't give a lot of direction, but bloody hell, he could have helped Tommy out. As for Travis Scott, he's really not sure why he's here. He doesn't look right, he doesn't sound right, and it's just distracting. And Elliot Page playing Sinon might be the worst casting for a role I've ever seen, because Sinon is described by Odysseus as the greatest soldier I've ever known. Yet this tiny, featherless, flightless baby bird running across the sand is apparently that great warrior. I laughed out loud, and I don't care who you are, it looks absolutely ridiculous and shows how far Nolan is willing to bend the knee to please the Hollywood gods. Pretty hard to get swept away by Greek mythology when you start with a tiny person playing dress-up as a legendary soldier. And it's not just the questionable casting that keeps pulling me out of the movie, it's also the script. The Odyssey is one of the greatest adventure stories ever written, packed with monsters, gods, magic, temptation, revenge, and loss. Everything you could want in an epic fantasy. But Christopher Nolan tells it almost like he's ticking off a checklist. Here's the Cyclops, rushed through and stripped of any meaning. Now here's Circe, who Odysseus spends about 10 minutes with instead of the 1 year from the original story. Here are the sirens. Well, we think they're there because you never actually see them. They're hidden in the mist. Here's Calypso, whose story remains a mystery if you're not already familiar with it. And here are the Laestrygonians, who appear with little setup and no story, but are luckily ready to attack. Everything happens, just not in very interesting ways. There isn't much sense of discovery, mystery, or wonder. It's almost as though Nolan is so pressed to get through the source material while lugging around IMAX cameras that he forgets to turn it into a tale of magic and drama. The result is a film that moves without ever really gathering momentum. I was never bored, but I was rarely captivated, and that's a huge difference because great epics don't simply tell stories. They make their stories feel larger than life. They create moments you never forget. When Gandalf stands against the Balrog, you remember it forever. When Maximus walks through the wheat fields dreaming of home, you remember it forever. When a T-Rex escapes in Jurassic Park, you're not going to forget that. But ask yourself, what's that moment in The Odyssey? I genuinely struggle to think of one. Everything is well made, but none of it feels special or memorable, and I think that's because Christopher Nolan may have been the wrong director for this particular story. Now, before everyone loses their minds, relax, Nolan fans. Hear me out. Christopher Nolan is a great filmmaker. That's not really up for debate. The man gave us The Dark Knight, Inception, The Interstellar, The Dunkirk, Oppenheimer. He's one of the last directors who can convince a studio to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a filmmaker's vision, and Hollywood needs more people like him. But even the greatest directors have their strengths, and in the wrong story, those strengths can become weaknesses. Christopher Nolan has built his entire career on making the impossible feel believable. Batman feels real. Dreams have logical rules. Time travel has rules. Black holes have science behind them. Everything is grounded. Everything has weight. Everything has an explanation. That's exactly why his films are so interesting. But The Odyssey isn't asking to be grounded, it's asking to be mythical. It's asking to feel ancient. It needs mystery. It needs magic. It needs the surreal. Look at Gladiator. Every time Maximus dreams of walking through those wheat fields, every glimpse of the afterlife, every note of Hans Zimmer's score, Ridley Scott isn't just telling you the story, he's inviting you to feel something. Whether those visions are real or dreams doesn't matter, because the emotion is real. He's willing to push into the surreal to add some movie magic and try to find me a guy who won't reenact that wheat field scene every time he walks through long grass. Christopher Nolan, on the other hand, never really allows The Odyssey to become that kind of movie. Even the fantasy feels restrained. The Cyclops should have been terrifying. Instead, he's just there. The sirens should have been haunting, beautiful, mesmerizing. The kind of scene people would still be talking about 20 years from now. Instead, they're hidden away, covered by smoke, almost apologizing for existing. When our Greek hero swims toward the sirens, Nolan chooses to just sail away, leaving the character's fate as a mystery. It's like the film keeps pulling back just when it should be leaning in. Be brave, that's what I kept thinking. This is Greek mythology, one of the greatest fantasy adventures ever written. Go for it. Don't be afraid of the weirdness. Don't be afraid of the beauty. Don't be afraid of the impossible. because that's what mythology is. Instead, everything feels strangely safe. You know, Mel Gibson would have gone to town with this story. You feel that he would have had the faith in his audience that they would go with him into the bazaar. Because remember, this is the guy who made Apocalypto in the Yucatec Maya language, while Christopher Nolan seems to have every actor do an American accent to make it easier for the American audience. One of the quickest ways to destroy immersion is with language, because language tells us where we are. Watch Master and Commander. Watch Gladiator. Watch Lord of the Rings. Nobody sounds like they just walked in from a modern Hollywood coffee shop talking too loudly on their mobile phone. Their words feel like they belong in their world. The dialogue in The Odyssey often doesn't. Characters speak with modern rhythms, modern phrasing, modern sensibilities. Nobody needs to sound exactly like Homer, but they should at least sound like they come from another time and place. And that brings us back to casting. As we all know, The Odyssey is Greek mythology, and we have a very large Greek population in the city of Melbourne, the third largest in the world. I have a lot of Greek friends, great people, great food, but I'm not sure Christopher Nolan has ever actually seen a Greek person. A diverse cast is fine in most films, but not in a film based on a Greek myth, because we're talking about immersion. People, they should at least look Greek. Now, many people online keep saying it's not a real story, it's just fiction, which to them means you can apparently do whatever the hell you like, but these people don't seem to understand what a myth actually is. A fiction based on a culture's history and beliefs, set in a specific place and time. And again, it's not just about the importance of mythology, it's about immersion, the suspension of disbelief. Let's use an example that's not thousands of years old. Let's say we want to make a movie about the mafia. Maybe we want to remake The Godfather. Everything stays exactly the same. The Corleones are still one of New York's great Italian crime families. The dialogue is the same. The plot is the same. As an audience, would you be expecting to see a lot of Italian-looking people in the cast, or would you expect a cast made up of the actors from Squid Game and The Jeffersons? If you say you could watch a mafia drama made up of that cast, I call bullshit. You lie, or you have some type of mental deficiency. A good film should make the audience forget about the cast and who they are, because once the audience is thinking about the casting, they've stopped thinking about the story. Yes, the Good Times Mafia story could be made, but would it be immersive? No, of course it wouldn't, because authenticity isn't just about historical facts, it's about creating an illusion so convincing the audience never questions it. Lupita Nyong'o is a fine actress and could play a lot of roles, but Helen of Troy? I never once thought I was watching Helen of Troy. It was a big distraction for absolutely no reason. Plus, they decided to make her an identical twin, which sort of cancels out her most beautiful woman in the world status. And they also decided to scar up her face with no explanation. This film has so many odd choices. Now, this doesn't mean you can't reimagine a famous story, but you have to have some balls when doing it. Look at Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Modern setting, classic script, done in the original language of Shakespeare's time. Now that's ballsy filmmaking. The Odyssey doesn't make any brave decisions. Every change from the original text is made to dumb down the story, not reframe it. And that's why the film lost me several times. Some of the casting choices were fine, but others constantly reminded me that I was watching a 21st century Hollywood production. And every time that happened, the illusion was broken. Not forever, just for a moment, but those moments add up. Then there's the action, and honestly, this surprised me the most. If you'd asked me before seeing the film what I was most looking forward to, I would have said Christopher Nolan directing one of the greatest adventure stories ever written. Massive sea battles, ancient armies, mythical creatures, the kind of spectacle on a grand scale that only someone like Nolan could bring to the big screen. That's what I thought. Instead, I thought the action was just fine, and fine is probably the most disappointing word you can use to describe a Christopher Nolan action sequence. It all looked real, the photography was good, the practical filmmaking was obvious, but I never felt that rush, that feeling where you instinctively lean forward in your seat, where you forget you're watching a film and just go along for the ride. In The Odyssey, I just watched the action. I didn't experience it, and everything felt surprisingly small and confined. I really felt like Christopher Nolan's obsession with realism became his limitation. He shot the action like an observer, not like a storyteller, with the camera documenting what's happening instead of making you feel it. Compare that to Ridley Scott, Mel Gibson, or George Miller. Watch the opening battle in Gladiator. Watch the Battle of Helm's Deep. Watch Braveheart. Or Fury Road. Those directors aren't afraid of emotion. They're not afraid of chaos. They're not afraid of making the audience feel overwhelmed. And everything is working together. The music, the editing, the performance, the camera, the atmosphere. So you're not just watching the action, you're living it. And it doesn't just apply to huge set pieces. When Mel Gibson rides a horse into a guy's bedroom to kill him with a long chain flail, you remember it because it's totally nuts and amazing. That's what I kept waiting for in The Odyssey. That one sequence where I sat back and thought, I've never seen anything like this. That scene never came. And maybe that's the biggest disappointment, because The Odyssey should feel magical, not just because there are monsters or gods or mythical islands, but because the story practically invented the fantasy adventure. This is the blueprint, and without stories like this, you probably don't get The Lord of the Rings. You don't get Star Wars. You don't get half the fantasy films we love today. This should have been a filmmaker's chance to completely let loose, to astonish us, to make us feel like children again. Instead, everything felt carefully controlled, carefully grounded, carefully restrained, almost as though Christopher Nolan didn't quite trust the mythology. And that's a shame, because if there was ever a story where he had permission to go too far, this was it. Be bold, be weird, be beautiful, be terrifying, be unforgettable, be brave. Instead, the film settles for being impressive. And that's where I think there's a huge difference between a film that's respected and a film that's loved. Competence earns respect, but great films earn love. And they get there through creativity, emotional weight, and the guts to go for it. Nobody walks out of The Lord of the Rings talking about how efficient it was, and nobody leaves Jurassic Park saying, well, that was competently made. People remember how those films made them feel. Wonder, fear, excitement, awe. That's movie magic. And for all of Christopher Nolan's extraordinary talent, I don't think The Odyssey ever captures that feeling. I walked out respecting the craftsmanship, admiring the ambition, appreciating the fact that Hollywood is still willing to make movies like this, and genuinely hoping that Christopher Nolan keeps making giant original films, because we need directors like that. But this time, I don't think he was the right filmmaker for the material. Not because he lacks talent, quite the opposite, but because every director sees the world differently. Ridley Scott sees myth, Mel Gibson sees passion, Peter Jackson sees wonder, and Christopher Nolan sees logic, systems, and realism. Usually, that's exactly what makes his films unique, but this time, I think that's what held him back, and that's why we got a good film and not a great epic. Anyway, maybe immersion is becoming an old-fashioned idea. Maybe audiences don't want to disappear into movies anymore. Maybe watching a film while checking your phone every 5 minutes is just the new normal. Well, I hope not. Because when cinema truly works, it still performs the greatest magic trick ever invented. It makes you forget you're watching a movie. As I said, good films earn respect. Great films earn love. Christopher Nolan gave me a film I respected. I just wish he'd given me one I loved.